our own community, including our own community here in Philadelphia. Through our events, we strive to frame and facilitate discussions that help us prepare urban educators, optimize academic achievement for all students, and foster meaningful community partnerships. Tonight's webinar is a perfect example of this mission in action. As we know, the pressures on our nation's public schools have never been greater. At the same time, income, racial, and geographic disparities continue to widen, creating deep opportunity gaps for many of our most historically marginalized populations. This evening, we'll be exploring how integrated student supports, an approach that seeks to address the academic, social, emotional, and physical needs of students, can help bridge these gaps, especially in times of crisis. We're honored to be joined by our colleagues and the co-authors of Critical Conditions, Addressing Education Emergencies Through Integrated Student Supports. Bruce Levine, Kimberly Sterin, and Elaine Weiss. They will lead our conversation tonight, sharing their expertise and insights drawn from their research and practice. We also have an exceptional panel of experts from across the country. These individuals have been at the forefront of developing strategies that promote equity and support for students in the most challenging circumstances. Together, they will explore how integrated student supports have made a tangible impact in urban and rural schools in cities like Philadelphia, PA, Briera, Kentucky, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. Before we dive into the discussion, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the individuals who made this webinar possible. A heartfelt thanks goes to Bruce Levine and Kimberly Sterin for their leadership and coordination of these events, to Eric O'Brien and Matthew Radmaker for their technological organization and support, and to Anthony Hopkins for marketing and promoting tonight's session. Without these contributions, this event would not be possible. Our goal this evening is to provide valuable insights and practical strategies for educators, administrators, community leaders, and researchers. Anyone working to address systemic inequities and support students, families, and communities through a holistic approach to education. With that, I'll turn things over to our esteemed co-authors and moderators, Bruce, Kimberly, and Elaine, who will guide us through tonight's conversation. Christine Grant, my co-chair with CCUE, will monitor the chat. Thank you again for joining us. We look forward to a productive and engaging discussion.
Sherry, thank you so much for that great introduction. Speaking on behalf of my co-authors and myself, I want to say how pleased we were to be able to collaborate with CCUE on this event. The mission of the organization matches up so well with the intent behind our book. And CCUE, which is really one of the great gems of the School of Ed at Drexel, has done such tremendous work educating people over the years about a lot of critical issues that face our schools and our school populations. And speaking personally, I just want to say how much of a privilege it's been for me to have been a charter member going back to the very beginning, and to have an opportunity to work with you and Christine as the co-leaders who've just done an excellent job continuing the legacy. So thank you for that. So as you can see, our topic for tonight is about integrated student supports. And if you don't know much about them at this point, hopefully in about 90 minutes, you'll leave us with a much better understanding and an appreciation for exactly what they are and what they do. You can go to the next slide, Kim. We're going to just do a very brief introduction. I'm Bruce Levine, and I am the director of the Education Policy Program at the School of Ed at Drexel, and also the Masters in Education Improvement and Transformation. I'm a clinical faculty member. Kimberly Sterin, my co-author, one of my co-authors, is a postdoctoral researcher and the director of research operations at the Joy Lab at Drexel School of Ed, which is the justice-oriented youth education lab. And Elaine Weiss, my other co-author, is an education policy analyst who's conducted research and led projects and advocacy work for the Economic Policy Institute, the Pew Charitable Trusts, and the National Academy for Social Insurance. Later on, we're going to have each of our panel members identify themselves in the interest of time. But what I wanted to say for now is that our agenda looks like it does on the screen. We've done the welcome and introduction. We're going to have my co-authors present an overview of the book, so you have a sense of what that was about. Then I'm going to turn to three of our panelists and ask them to talk a little bit about the context in which they are involved with ISS. After that, we'll have a panel discussion. We have a series of questions we want to go through with all five of our panelists. That will be followed by small group breakout discussions on a couple of questions that we think are worth discussion. And then we'll finish up with questions and sharing out of some of the takeaways that came out of our breakout session. So as you heard, our colleague Christine is going to be monitoring the chat for questions. So feel free to continue to put them in the breakout room. I think that's it. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elaine.
Thanks so much, Bruce. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks to everybody at Drexel and CCUE for making this possible. I want to briefly start with how this book happened. So in the summer of 2019, writing with former Massachusetts Secretary of Education, Paul Reville, I published my first book, Broader, Bolder, Better. That book describes how 7 diverse communities across the country have used an ISS approach. And by now, I think at least the audience knows that ISS stands for Integrated Student Supports. And the goal of these districts was to use ISS to meet the full range of their students' needs and to provide an enriching whole child education. And as Bruce said, we're going to dig more into that as we go, what those terms really mean. Around that time, Bruce and I had also begun to work with another colleague, CJ Huff, who's a former superintendent in Joplin, Missouri, to help districts affiliated with a particular ISS strategy called Bright Futures USA, to identify broader goals for their work, both for their students and for themselves, and help them develop systems to track and monitor progress towards those goals. When we were delighted that Kim joined us, COVID hit. And so we saw these districts going through COVID with their ISS strategies, and we naturally started to question to them and to each other how these districts might be better prepared because of their ISS strategies to deal with COVID and how they might be doing differently from other districts. We also made the connection at that time between the so-called education and emergency literature, which I'll talk about in a minute, and how ISS helps schools prepare for and deliver education in crisis contexts like that of COVID. And when we pitched that idea to the press at Harvard, they immediately took it. So 4+ years later, here we are. And we're, of course, in the middle of another series crises hitting our schools and our education system as a whole. Kim, you can go to the next slide. So I want to briefly explain what we mean when we say emergencies in education. There's actually a substantial body of research on how schools can and should deliver education to children who are living in emergency contexts, war zones, refugee camps, orphans, etc. This literature has generally, or the research has not been viewed as relevant to US or other Western education contexts. The impact of COVID on every single school in our country changed that to some extent, but the three of us in talking saw many pre-pandemic parallels to the realities in which many of our schools, if not most of them, are operating. So in the book, we briefly describe, for example, the impacts on students, teachers, and schools of mass unemployment, that came from the evolution of the Rust Belt, big recessions, et cetera. Waves of addiction and mass incarceration of parents and others in the community, crack, heroin, meth, opioids, a succession of them, gun violence, both what's happening in schools and outside in the community, and climate change, hurricanes, fires, and floods, all of which hit schools. The bottom line is that schools are on the front lines of dealing with our societal emergencies of a variety of types, and teachers are thus often in reality our quote unquote first responders. And that's a lot of what we talk about. Next slide, Kim. So I do want to briefly, and you're going to hear from some of the amazing folks in this community, but just quickly talk about the communities we studied. So our goal going into this was to understand how a broad variety of ISS approaches, and there are many different ways to integrate student supports into education work, from full service community schools to Promise Neighborhoods, Bright Futures to City Connects and others, how they might better prepare schools and districts to deal with COVID and also all of these other crises that schools really are dealing with. So, as in our prior book, Broader, Bolder, Better, we, the three of us, intentionally sought out a very diverse set of communities. All of them, however, that had strong and long-standing ISS structures and practices. As the map indicates, these range from extremely rural, Eastern Appalachian Kentucky, Berea here, to quote unquote inner city in North Minneapolis, and from tiny, Green Valley, Missouri, to medium, Salem, Massachusetts, and quite large, Frederick County and Winchester, Virginia, which have come together as one Bright Futures affiliate. This broad range, we hope, illustrates the potential for ISS to work well in pretty much any context, and also to highlight the variety of ways that districts implement ISS based on their own unique contexts. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to Kim.
Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. So as my co-authors have so well described, the integrated student supports approach is really getting at this holistic, whole child wraparound supports, thinking about all the ways that students and families might have these needs that need to be addressed prior to being able to really learn at their best in the classroom. And so looking at how these 5 communities contended with that during the pandemic really demonstrated what partnership networks and how the ISS approach can really contend with not only ongoing emergencies that they were already dealing with, but new and unprecedented ones like the pandemic, where no one really knew what to do. This was something new that everyone was contending with. And we wanted to uplift this quote from Dreama Gentry, who's the CEO of Partners for Rural Impact in Berea, who said, "For us, COVID was just the next one." So when using the ISS approaches, they were already very familiar with kind of being in this emergency mode and were able to activate their partnerships to address the new and emergent emergencies that they were dealing with. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, here are just a few of our high-level observations from these communities. Because they already had these pre-existing understandings and connections, they were able to ramp up their response much more quickly. Their families had their technology quicker, Wi-Fi quicker, food quicker, and things like that. Although the range of needs was extremely broad and no one institution was able to address them all, the established network could. And so these partnerships already in place and beyond were able to address them. ISS communities use a collaborative leadership model. And so not only are your principals leading, your superintendents, but also your nonprofit partners, your community school coordinators, and some of our districts folks that are here today will demonstrate and discuss, especially in Philly, the different leadership models that they implement. And then we wanted to just mention how that transition away from in-school learning to virtual learning was smoother than in other contexts where they were able to address not only the learning needs, but also social emotional needs at that time. And so we have 5 broad lessons learned from our book, and we're gonna use these 5 lessons to drive our panel discussion, but we wanted to just spend a moment with them here. First, we discovered that unmet need is like an iceberg. The part you see is just the tip. So during the pandemic, a lot of our communities really dug even deeper in. While they knew their students and families well, they got to know them even better in this emergency context. Various vulnerabilities were really showing their face. And so we came away with kind of knowing when you're seeing maybe some elements of food insecurity or housing insecurity, using the ISS approach was able to get deeper and help and support families in more holistic ways. Secondly, schools can't go it alone. They need partners. The pandemic really demonstrated how our teachers are acting as first responders at that first level, helping folks, and how important those partnerships are to addressing those such as health needs and social services needs. 3, no cookie cutter approach. So many communities were doing this very differently. And that is a really important takeaway, because some people say, okay, what's the plan? What's the framework? What's the silver bullet solution? But the way that folks were able to be flexible and really respond to their communities was really what helped it work well. 4th, our teachers and school staff really need to receive social emotional support too. The better their teachers and all educators and staff were supported, the better they were able to support their students and families, which should really come as no surprise for folks who have lived and worked in school buildings. But it's something that we're seeing, especially as we see extreme teacher attrition from the profession. That's really important and need to be focused on, and something that ISS schools were able to do largely because of those partnerships. And then lastly, we really do also want to recognize that while the ISS approach can really lead to these phenomenal and better outcomes and help communities grow, it's not the solution. It's not the full-bodied solution to these ongoing emergencies that are so integrated within many of our social systems. And so we also want to advocate for further investment in social safety nets overall. And now we're ready for our panel, and I'll pass it back to Bruce to start us off there.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. And so we did assemble what we think is a great panel. And just so you know, we intentionally included 2 members who were among the people that we actually spoke to as part of the research for our book. But we also have 3 panelists who are from or in Philadelphia. And it's important from both a CCUE standpoint, a Drexel standpoint, and from the standpoint of us authors to include Philadelphia in this, because it's been such a big part of, well, all of our lives in one way or another. And there's some great stories and some important learnings to come out of that. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to ask 3 of our panelists to each take about 5 minutes to just sort of introduce themselves and then give us some context for how they're engaged in ISS work in their respective communities. So first one I will turn to is my good friend Maxwell Akuamoa Boateng. And Max, if you could introduce yourself and speak for about 5 minutes, that'll give us a good background to for the rest of the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Bruce, and good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you all and to learn alongside with you. We are educators, and that's what comes first. I am certainly excited to share with you what we have been doing in Philadelphia and the ways we've operationalized the work of community schools to respond to critical conditions as we're discussing. A little bit about me. I started my career as an educator in Houston, Texas. And so this hits home, considering that I had the opportunity of supporting my students through Harvey. And that was the first critical condition moment that was really quite city and also impactful in that way of disrupting education. Following Houston, I moved to Philadelphia, took over community schools. And at the time, we were in the second year of the initiative. This is one of Mayor Kenny's, who's a previous mayor. This is one of his initiatives. And a big part of the office that community schools lived in the city was the mayor's office of education. Their role was to take back from state control and establish a board of education in Philadelphia to guide and support the school district. So a lot of the policies that they put in place was to ensure that education and the outcomes that we were going to see in Philadelphia was going to improve. As community schools, we took on the work of piloting some of these ideas. And again, in response to the already conditions that existed. Compared to most community schools around the country, which functions around the 4 pillars, one of the pillars that we changed was school climate. And a big reason for that was because we now had to think about attendance. We had to also think about the conditions that were in the schools that students were going into. And then, of course, challenges which we're still battling through, such as teacher shortage. And so a lot of our work that you hear tonight, as we share the work of community schools, you'll see that we are heavily focused on the school climate work, and that's unique to Philadelphia. Other areas talk about family engagement, integrated student supports, which is what we're discussing tonight, expanded learning time, and then, of course, collaborative leadership. All those things collectively is what we have built as part of our mission to align resources and services and ensure the well-being of young people in preparation for anything else that might disrupt their work. So we pride ourselves and say we're removing barriers so students and families can thrive, and then we can graduate students that are college and career ready that can also reach to their aspirations. And we know for a fact there has been other conditions such as gun violence, mental health, all those things that fall into the lap of young people that they bring with them to schools, and it disrupts their educational process. And so when we think of critical conditions, we're not just thinking of the catastrophes that happen, but also the social and political changes across the landscape that sometimes disrupts the educational process. So looking forward to sharing more about that. I know members of my team are here today to just share, so I'll leave some airtime for them. But to give you a little bit of overview, we operate in 20 out of 200 and something schools in Philadelphia. We have a team of 33 people that includes coordinators that are inside the schools and then operational support teams that are in the office. And so as time goes on tonight, we'll share a little bit about those insights and how we work to operationalize our work. But if I don't leave you with anything to take away in this work of improving outcomes for young people, there are 4 things that we strategically do. We connect people to resources to meet them where they're at. We coordinate resources and services. We connect people to information so they can make informed decisions. We coordinate resources to meet people where they're at. We cultivate collaborative spaces that are safe and inclusive. And then we celebrate those successes all together so we can build momentum to continue to do more and to impact other people to lead from where they're at. So you'll get to hear a lot of those insights and how we operationalize our work through those 4 C's, and definitely looking forward to learn alongside over the course of time.
Thanks, Max. That was really a good introduction to what's going on in Philadelphia, which is to say there's a lot. And we'll hear from Robin and Mercedes in a little bit. We have questions for them. But for now, we also wanted to make sure that we got across the message that as much as we're very much focused on urban schools, integrated student supports play just as important a role in non-urban environments as well. And so we wanted to make sure to have Beth Dotson-Brown with us. And Beth, if you can now introduce yourself and talk a bit about your work in Kentucky, that would be great.
Sure. Well, thank you for asking me to participate. I'm really happy to be here this evening and, like Maxwell said, learn from everyone who is here because there's always so much to learn. I work for Partners for Rural Impact. Our headquarters are in Berea, Kentucky. When I first met Elaine, I think I was working on a Promised Neighborhood grant. And then I transitioned to a full service grant. And that's the grant that we talked about for the book. Now that grant has finished. So now I'm serving as associate director of all of our full service programs in Kentucky. So we have 6 full service grants that are serving 23 school districts and 109 schools. And the great thing about that is that our grants come from 3 different cohorts. So, you know, we have the senior person in the room who has a lot to share. We have new strategies that we're trying that new and old can learn from. And all of it is really focused holistically on the students. That's one of the reasons I think that the ISS approach works so well for us, because we recognize that this work has to be holistic if we are going to help students reach success. Some of what is unique in our area is that we are in the Appalachian Mountains, so the terrain is hilly, it is mountainous. There are lots of national forests and other forest land. There are streams, and the weather is often a challenge. So we became even more nimble during COVID, and it's a good thing because we've had major floods since then that have really caused a challenge and have gotten into some of our schools that had to be totally redone. This winter was really tough because in the mountains, the winter weather can totally shut down the schools. So students didn't really fully get back to school after Christmas until about mid-February. And so when they do come back, we're not only dealing with the, you know, academic needs that have become larger, but in some cases, you're also dealing with traumatic experiences that students have had because of the weather. Because of being disconnected for so long. And so we have recognized how important it is to work with our partners, because it's only through what we all have to contribute that we can really meet the needs of the students and the families and the teachers. So that's what we're striving to do in all of our places. And we'll talk more about that as the evening goes on.
Great. Thanks, Beth. That was a great introduction to what you've been doing, which is some amazing work down in the Berea area. And so now we'll move north to another urban area, Minneapolis, and another person who was involved in our research and spoke with us and was extremely helpful. And that's Benito. And so Benito, if you can talk to us about what's going on with your school and the North Side Achievement Zone in Minneapolis, that would be terrific.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bruce. And thank you, everybody, for the invitation. Really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time this evening with everyone, hoping to learn as well as to share some of our learnings that we've experienced here in Minneapolis. I'm in my 13th year at Ascension Catholic School in North Minneapolis, and my 10th year in the role as principal at our school. We, of course, are partnered with NAS, Northside Achievement Zone, which in many ways is modeled after the Harlem Children's Zone. And we serve about, on average, 300 scholars each year. Right now, we're at about 275, 280. And probably about 75, in any given year, between 75 and 85% of our scholars qualify for free and reduced lunch. And we serve scholars in the neighborhood. We're a parish school, so the parish and our school have been on the same block in the heart of North Minneapolis since the late 1890s. And we, to this day, serve the population. Probably 95+% of our families live within 5 miles of our school. So we truly serve the neighborhood. And our partnership with NAS was in its first or second year when I joined the team at Ascension. So we've been partnered with them for a number of years. We're what's considered an anchor school, one of their primary schools. So they support us in a number of different ways. We have co-located staff. They have co-located staff at our school called family coaches. And those coaches work with scholars as well as the parents. And so they help them with goal setting. They help to monitor those goals, whether they're professional goals for the adults or academic goals, of course, for the scholars. So they're a great support there, not only in the academic arena, but as we all know, we all have lives outside of those four walls, right, that we call school. And so some of that food insecurity that families experience, housing insecurity that families experience, the Northside Achievement Zone really has over the years stepped in ways that we're not able to. Certainly as a school and as a parish school, we're able to call on our church sometimes to be able to assist families in the short term. But NAS really provides an opportunity for some long-term solutions in areas like food insecurity and housing and employment for our families. And so they've just been a phenomenal partner for us. We are extremely grateful for the way that they walk alongside of us each and every day. And at the end of the day, we really partner with them and with the folks in our building to help scholars know and experience on a daily basis that they're loved, right? Every parent, one of the things, of course, about our school is nobody gets placed at our school, right? Unlike what we know across the country as traditional public schools, depending on where you live, you perhaps are automatically enrolled. And so we talk a lot with families about that's one thing, if there's nothing else that every family in our building has in common, is that they made the conscious choice for their child to be at our school. And they, like we, want those scholars to have a great educational experience. And we're not perfect. Man, we make mistakes every single day, but we work really, really hard at helping to provide that great educational experience for scholars and their families. And the Northside Achievement Zone helps us in a huge way to accomplish that. So thanks again for inviting me here this evening. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Benito. And I think our listeners can see that we painted a picture of three different contexts, all of which have the integrated student supports very much at the heart of what's going on in them. And so what we'd like to do now is, as we indicated earlier, sort of leverage some of our findings and use those as the basis for some questions for our panelists. So we'll get into that right about now. We took down the slides so we can actually see each other a little bit better. And I'll open up the questions, but we'll be taking turns with them. So using the first one of our lessons, which was that unmet need is like an iceberg and the part you see is just the tip. What I would like to ask, and I'm going to start with you, Mercedes, and let you introduce yourself as well as you answer the question. But in the course of your work with a school employing ISS and working with Max and others in the network of community schools, what have you seen as some of the critical needs of students and families that need to be met in order for real learning to occur by the students?
I am the community school coordinator from McCoy Elementary, and I have been in this position going on my third year. One of the things that I have observed in a school, I mean, something as simple as uniform, it's huge. Not only just finding the uniform for that child, but finding them a place to watch them regularly so that they can come to school, on time and every day. So, they've mentioned a lot of those, but food, sending an extra pack of like food with the child just at home every evening. We have a list of kids that it's an underground list. They don't know we have it, but we make sure that they, have extra snacks to go home with on Fridays. So just simple things like that, we address so many. So I have stories for days. Housing insecurity, utilities, and from there, like you said, tip of the iceberg. You might come in with one thing, but then the bottom, it's just so much that just goes right underneath it. I might have gone in for uniforms, but now I find out that they may be getting evicted. So a lot of things we get to observe in this work.
So just to follow up a little bit on that. So you said sometimes students will come into you and certain things will become clearer, but do you have sort of a strategy for how you go about trying to get underneath that iceberg and figuring out what some real problems might be that are not immediately hitting you in the face?
Yeah, well, definitely. It's building relationships. someone at that school, one of us, because, like Max said, climate is huge. So not only, the school climate, but the staff climate as well. So, one of the things that I know I have done, and that, we've done in other schools, is build a rapport with everyone in that school. Everyone knows me. So I know that somebody is gonna have some sort of connection to that child. Be it another community member that's like the cousin of the grandmother of the whoever, that's the friends with the principal or whoever, it doesn't matter. That's how I'm gonna reach them. So a lot of times we're like, oh my God, so-and-so didn't have shoes today, or so-and-so shoes have holes on the bottom. You're thinking, what are we gonna do? I said, okay, I can find you the shoes, find me the size, and then who is closer with that family? Let's figure out what's going on. And we just go to work, and it's like teamwork. And that's how we address it. I mean, that's how we get to them. It's relationship.
Right. Yeah, and the community school coordinator role is so key to making the integrated student support strategy work. Benito, I'm going to ask you the same question to maybe illustrate some of what you've seen as the critical needs of students that need to be met in order for real learning to occur.
Definitely social emotional learning, right? And mental health support. I don't think it's any surprise to anyone that clearly before 2020, those challenges existed, right? They weren't new with the oncoming of COVID, but without question, that exponentially spiked a lot of those challenges and issues. When we first returned back to school in person, we probably spent the next 1.5 to 2 school years talking about how we were all learning how to be back in the same room together. People learning how to physically be in the same space with another human being. And one of the things that we noticed with our scholars is that tempers were shorter, right? They were quicker to express themselves physically rather than verbally. And this was something that, wasn't every once in a while. We were seeing this consistently with scholars. And so having some counselors on site to be able to work with scholars, we've incorporated the use of counseling services through Hennepin County, as well as some supports through NAS. They have a wellness team within NAS. There's an organization within North Minneapolis, within 5 minutes of us, called Washburn Center for Children, which provides both inpatient and outpatient services for scholars. And in communities of color, when you start talking about therapy, a lot of folks don't want to talk about that, right? That is taboo. And so when we're talking about ways that we can work with scholars and ways that we can work with families, all to not just help scholars be successful at school, but to be successful in life, right? We have to have some really candid conversations with families about what's happening. And families start to reveal a lot of what those things are that they are experiencing outside of school. Because there's one thing that I know: when a parent comes to school, regardless of what the situation is, they want the same thing for their children. They want a great educational experience. They want their child to be successful. They might express it a little bit differently than some other parents, but they want the same thing. And so we try to start from that premise as we have those conversations, especially those difficult conversations with families, but definitely through Northside Achievement Zone and some of the resources that they bring to the table, supporting that social emotional learning and that mental health support are huge.
Yeah, and something that we hear quite a bit. Thank you. That was a great answer. Kim?
Yeah, so our next question centers around partnerships, and this I'm going to direct to Robin and then Mercedes. We'd love for you to discuss the partnerships that have been critical to making ISS work in your schools and communities. How have certain partnerships helped to fill areas of needs that schools aren't equipped to provide on their own? And from the partner's perspective, how has having this established partnership with the school better enabled you to provide your service?
Good evening, everyone. I am Robin Robinson with Methodist Services. I'm the director of our Community Schools program, overseeing 2 of the schools currently under Max's tutelage. So a little bit about our partnerships that we've developed in my team, because I can't say that I work alone. One of the main things is making sure that we are meeting the students where they are, but not just the students, the teachers, the administrators in the buildings, the principals, the counselors, everyone that is relating to a child, we have to meet them where they are. And that's just having meetings, discussing our programs, the needs, how we can respond and assist to circumstances or situations that they are currently involved with. We also have activities that we share with some of the leadership in the school to help the children get an idea of who we are so that they see us on a regular basis. We're not disappearing. They need to know that we're available every day in that building, and we can be that trusted individual for them to come and talk to if need be. We also have family forums where we bring in outside partnerships to come and discuss food insecurities, budgeting, employment resources. What does that look like? In terms of mental health, we have individuals come in and talk about mental health, what that looks like, why it should not be taboo, especially in our community, and how it's okay not to be okay. But while we're doing that, we're developing a sense of trust with those youth as well as the partners in the building. They know that if at any time they need to support on myself or my staff, we are available to jump and assist wherever we can. There's no, wait a minute, oh, we're too busy. We stop what we're doing. We make the time and meet them where they are to help resolve the issues that they may be experiencing at that time. And if for some reason one person in our team is stuck, we find someone else who can come in and provide that additional assistance and support.
Thank you, Robin. I think you make some great points about the importance of developing trust, showing consistency, so that you can really support students and families.
It's the only way we remove those barriers that the families are experiencing, and if they don't trust us, they don't open up. So it's important that we're there and we're readily available.
Absolutely. Mercedes, wondering if you could jump in. Maybe you have a story or an example of a partnership that is working really well for you now.
So Robin took up a lot of because that's one of the things that we have in Philly, is that we have the team to support the community schools, like we're all a team, like she said. So in one of the ways that partnerships really are integrated in our school, for me, right, in my school, is our out-of-school time providers, so OSC providers for after-school programs, and our GCMs. A lot of times, how we're having a lot of teacher turnover and stuff like that. And a lot of schools, like we're low on like climate staff and everything like that. We help, we come right in. So that's one of the ways that a partnership has been able to step in, helping out in the cafeteria, helping, clean out that, like, standing in the front office, while the secretary takes a break. I mean, it's not always ideal, but we're trying to fill in those gaps, right? So in order for, a lot of our parents, they come in and they see you and they're like, oh, you answering the phone? I saw you outside giving out food the other day. Oh, okay, you're in everything. Okay. So they're like, oh, I recognize you. I'm seeing your face. Okay, so if I have a problem, so-and-so came up to me from the community, said they had a problem with whatever. Now I can come to you. So those are gaps that we're filling, right? Other gaps, I think, is through the resources. Like I said earlier, clothing, food, all of those gaps that like our school can't fill, like that, like sending extra food home, or just for the spring break, we have a meal program coming up through Phil Abundance to give out food for the kids for the duration of the spring break. Make sure they have that. That was a gap that our Phil Abundance partnership was able to, you know, come through. We also have a way that we, you know, through operations, that it just trickles down. We have a referral system, that's how the GCMs get, you know, like the red flag, like, okay, reach out to this family. And if they don't have that support, they don't have that rapport with the family and that trust. When they call, they're like, who are you? Oh, you Miss Robin, the one that was giving out the what's it called? Okay, yeah. That's the connection that we're making. You know what I mean? Like, that's huge. And that's how we're able to fill in these gaps. So I hope I answered that question as best as I could, because I have stories for days. So let me know.
Well, could I just add one more thing? It's so important for us to show compassion to the families and to listen to them, because oftentimes people just want to be heard and not shunned or felt as if their issue or concern doesn't matter. So our goal is to make sure that we're listening intently so that we can provide the resources and support that that family needs.
So those are fantastic. And thank you all so much. It's been great to hear from you and to meet you in some cases. One of the things that's coming through loud and clear is your strong commitment, all of you, to, you know, seeing and understanding children, you know, their everything about them and how they walk in with their full daily lives and their yearly lives and their lives and their daily realities into classrooms and how that matters. And that all of you are committed to trust, building relationships, partnerships, and understanding and meeting need. At the same time, one of the things, and this was lesson 3 from our book, and we felt it was very important, that there is not a cookie cutter approach to this. And that even among places that are implementing full service community schools, as is true both in Philadelphia and in Eastern Appalachian Kentucky, these do look different, and they should look different because communities are different and schools are different. And so we were hoping, and I wanted to start with you, Beth, just because, as you alluded to, the context in Berea is in some ways really unique, even in the whole country, in terms of isolation, frankly, in terms of just the level and scope of poverty and other issues. And so I was hoping you could start talking a bit about how did you determine, because you've been there so long, since long before it was PRI, how to shape your school's operations and programming, and in what ways have your community's unique context, and in particular, information that you've learned from needs and assets assessments informed your decision-making about how you structure ISS in your communities?
Yeah, we have learned a lot over the years. One of the things that we've definitely learned is something that Mercedes and Robin both mentioned, and you mentioned, Elaine, and that's the importance of trusting relationships. We have evolved to primarily hiring school coordinators from our local communities. That's the first step, because when you hire someone from the local community, they know the community better. They already have some of those relationships, and it's easier for them to build the trusting relationships. So when we're starting out in a place, that's how we start. We also do a lot of assessments, and they're formal and they're informal. So we start off by looking at data. The data is available for any of us to look at, and we can talk with the administration about that data. I'm talking about absenteeism, academic scores, kindergarten readiness. Where might we want to focus some energies to improve some of those things? We also do surveys, assessments that are formal for parents, for students, for administrators, for teachers. Throughout the year, we will move on to doing small focus groups, doing individual conversations, but mostly what we do is we listen. That is the most important thing. When I first started working at Berea Community School on our full service grant, I scheduled a series of meetings with our school coordinators and our principals and our guidance counselors to listen, to ask, what are the hopes that you have for your school that you haven't been able to realize? You know, is there a way that we can help with that? And even within our region, you might be surprised at how varied those things are. Last summer, I was at a meeting with a school district that was having a lot of trouble retaining teachers. One of the reasons is because they're a small school district, they don't pay a lot. There's a neighboring school district that pays more. And in their area, they had no childcare available. So if you had two working parents and they needed childcare and they had to drive to the next county anyway, they might as well get a job over there. So we were able to work with them to establish a childcare center that is providing that good early childhood education we want, and also helping the teachers stay in the community where they really want to work. Sometimes, I'll give you just one more example. Sometimes those assessments show us things that the administration doesn't really believe. So for example, in one of the things that we like to do that a lot of schools are not able to do in our region is after school programming. Well, we had a principal tell us, no, that won't work at my school, because they couldn't provide transportation. So especially in a rural area where you might live far away and the only way you have to get home is your parents come and pick you up or your neighbors or someone, they didn't think kids would stay. It's become the most successful thing we've done at that school because the students said they wanted it and they really did want it. And so those are just, you know, some of the ways we listen and try to identify those unique needs.
Thank you so much, Beth. That's great. And as someone who's been working with data and all that all my life, I just want to give a huge shout out to a much broader and expansive notion of what data is and where it can come from. And if there's anyone who's a test score person listening here, you know, pay attention to this. So Mercedes, I'd like to ask you the same question just to highlight how different, you know, assessments and understandings and community realities are in shaping how you approach ISS. So if you could talk about a bit about how that is in Philadelphia, that would be fantastic.
So that's very interesting. We do make a lot of our decisions. Well, we have been for a little while now using a lot of data to drive a lot of the decisions that we've been making. I mean, data was one of the first things that got us to be a community school in the first place. So there was a food insecurity, and there was a need for food, there was a need for clothing, there was a need for adult education, there was a need for additional resources. So that's part of my needs assessment. That's very basic for us right now, because we all work at that. But I have an example that I would like to say from one of our schools called Gideon, where my coworker Greg is there. There was a need for children, like you said about transportation and everything. They have a walking school bus now because the children could not, like the parents couldn't drop them off in school. They were late, and now it's like parents once a week, like once a day. It's like one parent just rotates, and they have a walking school bus every morning. It has eliminated lateness and, you know, absenteeism in that school, and it's thriving right now, right? So of course, Max is trying to get us all to do it. Hasn't been very successful in my school, but I admire Greg, you know, at Gideon, that approach. One that we have done though in our school is that community members were feeling very not safe in the morning to cross the street, they could get to school, the ones that are like early, that arrive earlier and stuff like that. So we held a focus group with parents, got them to talk to like safety corridors, got them all certified to become like little, what were they called? Oh my God, safety guards every morning. So now we have like 3 and they rotate, And I'm one of them, actually. I have some days when I'm not able. But I'm also in there directing traffic, and kids and community members and children and grandparents. And aunts and uncles are feeling more comfortable. They're coming up to me when we have them in the morning and dismissal. Like, I'm so glad you guys did that. It's amazing. I love it. And it's our own community members. So if there's disputes or whatever, they can, you know, deal with it themselves and each other. So it's very easy. So I've utilized data. Didn't want to go over the same thing, although I know for Philly we do a lot more than you know, you'll see that. So, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Moving to thinking back about the social emotional support for teachers and staff. This is one for Benito first. We're wondering if you can talk about how your school is addressing social emotional needs of teachers and staff, and how NAS has supported that work to support everyone in your school community.
Thank you for that question. I'm smiling because the past couple of weeks, there's a young lady at our school who's in first grade, and she's been struggling a little bit in class. So she starts off in the morning with me, and we do a little bit of work together. And this morning, she says to me, "Do you live here?" And meaning at the school. And I said, no, I don't live here. She said, do other people that work here, do they live here? I said, no, they go home. We have lives outside of here. And that piece about lives outside of work, right? Like the perception of scholars in that building oftentimes is that encompasses all of who we are and what we do. And we know that teachers have a heavy load. I think it's been said multiple times in this conversation that teachers have been in many ways like first responders, right? And they wear a ton of different hats, from counselor to teacher to parent, right, if you will. And a lot of stresses there in the workplace, right? In their interactions with scholars and with parents, not to say anything about the challenges that they might have going on in their own lives. And of course, folks are very familiar with the killing of George Floyd and what our city experienced in terms of the trauma within our city and the aftermath of that. And then also just gun violence within our neighborhood, the neighborhood that we live in. It's not uncommon for scholars to hear gunshots a couple of nights a week. I don't know if folks have shot spotters in their neighborhoods. They're these systems that they put on poles and on buildings to track gunfire. We have a shot spotter on our school, right? So there's been gun violence, significant gun violence within a block of our school. Folks have lost their lives within a block of our school. That not only weighs heavily on the scholars and the families who live in that neighborhood, as well as the teachers who work at that school and who work with those scholars and who work with those families, and some of whom live in the neighborhood. In fact, we're truly blessed that we have a number of our teachers who are graduates of our school. We're preschool through 8th grade school. And we have the highest number of alumni who have returned in these last couple of years that are working at Ascension. And we're so proud of that. But when you talk about the emotional needs for staff, we've been fortunate to be able to work with, I mentioned earlier, Washburn Center for Children. They also work with adults. And so the fall following the summer of 2020, when George Floyd was killed, we began to do healing circles with the adults in our building. And we weren't sure, how many folks would come. Pretty much the entire staff would show up and just share from their perspective what was on their hearts. And we learned things about each other in that hour once a week, after working with folks sometimes for a decade or more, that we never knew. We never knew about the burdens that those individuals who perhaps worked across the hall from us we're carrying every single day. And so we not only offered that opportunity for those healing circles in that large group setting, but opportunities for folks to engage in private therapy sessions, which folks were able to take advantage of, and just really preaching to people that it's so important to take care of yourself. Because if you're not healthy, if you're not well, you're not going to be able to be in front of those scholars on a daily basis and help them navigate the things that they need to navigate, not only academically, but socially. And so we feel it's really, really important. And again, we're not perfect. We don't have all the answers, and we certainly don't get it right all the time. But it's certainly top of mind for us. And it's really, really important that we are doing our best to help our staff take care of themselves so we can better take care of our scholars and their families.
Great answer. That's a really, as somebody just said in the chat, that was a powerful story and important insights. And so, Max, I would ask you to comment a bit on the same question, and then I have another question to go on to for you as well. But please share any thoughts you have about this this question that Benito just addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I mentioned conditions, I was talking about the school environment. We know the environment that we foster for young people is how they grow healthy to become healthy adults. So when I was in Houston, there was actually a program that we had for teacher well-being that focused on the adults and transferred into students. And so I'll share those resources with you all in a second, but Fuel Ed is the program. And they believe that secure adults create environments to build secure young people. And so in order for us to be good educators, we had to also go through and unpack our own traumas so that we did not create environments where we were inciting those on young people. And that for teachers was, again, whether it was going through therapy one-on-one with a counselor, thinking about their own educational experiences and how they create environments to bring young people in so that again, the young people can feel validated and those supports. For us in Philadelphia, we've adopted the Maslow's hierarchy as our way of assessing sense of belonging, which is also a survey data point in our district-wide survey. And so we look at those numbers to see how the guardrails that the district leadership has set, if we are doing the things in schools to establish environments that are healing-centered and allowing young people to be able to be themselves. So a few years ago, all of our staff were trained through this program from California, which focused on healing-centered engagement. And it talked about how we establish those environments with other adults. So when we onboard partners, we kind of create that gauge by talking through how we do conflict resolution, how we create space to work together, how we communicate, the way we talk with each other, and all those things that help create that environment for adults to relate to each other. So that's one way that we're addressing, again, that environment and those conditions that we establish for success. Another program that we are now embarking on piloting on a larger scale is through Temple University. Their medical school actually has a program called Phases, and it focuses on unpacking trauma through community and making schools better informed around those practices. And so they bring in mentors. They also have specific trainings that the teachers go through. One of the challenges, and I'm sure I don't know where most folks are coming from, but a lot often you have to partner with the teacher federations to be able to implement a lot of those trainings. And so that's something that we're working through those let's say barriers, but it is a no-brainer, right? Adults in the building need to be on the path to healing because the things that the young people are bringing are, especially in our city, they are quite intense. And so we try to make sure that we can build those secure adults as much as we can using programs like that. And we have a lot of university partners in general and through community schools work that are already experts in that field. So we try to bring them in to create those informed practices. We also, as a city agency, have access to the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disabilities. And so they have community wellness engagement units where it works through the community to talk through some of the things that are happening. So we don't just wait for an incident to happen, like a shooting, to send those people out to start engaging with young people. They're already having those prevention conversations. So when those things happen, they have that relational capital, and it makes it easier to mobilize resources and support. The last one I'll share is more of like a joyful one. So in all those environments, conditions don't always have to address the negative aspect. It also has to build those positive pieces, which is those relational capitals that we've talked about before. So we try to get team builders, check-in activities, and we train our staff to implement those things. So they're building that norm across with adults. So when conflicts do happen, it's already a natural way of using that relational capital to advance and solve the problems. So Fulcrum is a leadership institute out of California. They came in and did it with our principals. And you know, principals that, let's be real, adults don't like games. They teach team building through games and fun games. Our principals let their guards down, and as a result of those, we're having these deep conversations that were unpacking challenges that have existed for a very long time. And so we like to think like, yeah, there's those intense moments where we have to focus, but then there are those moments where we let our hair down and connect with each other on a human level so that we can learn from each other. So I put the links to those organizations in the chat so you can check them out and study that further. I'm sure, again, for the Temple University version, wherever you are, there is a university who has that expertise that you can engage with a professor like the one we're working with to use those graduate students to support the work at your school.
Thank you, Max. That was really, really powerful. And so many amazing examples to hear, especially about for teachers not repeating their traumas, learning what unpacking their own really demonstrates the power of ISS and how holistically you're addressing all of and being preventative. And speaking about connecting on a human level, we're ready to move into some small groups. I think you're going to get invited to join a breakout room for about 10 to 15 minutes we have before we'll come back together at the end. And here are 2 guiding questions, just sharing your reactions to what's been discussed. And then we'd love to think about next steps. What could we do now to support students, families, and educators considering our multiple current crises? I'll pause speaking and enjoy your breakout rooms. We look forward to coming back and sharing about your discussion. Back together. I hope you guys had fruitful and productive conversations. Did we want to share some of the questions that were raised in the chat?
Jack asked, are the healing circles a part of the restorative curriculum? And if so, do you still use that curriculum?
I'll just share short answer, no. But the healing circles definitely is a part of a number of restorative curricula that are out there. For us, we actually work with NAS, Northside Achievement Zone, members of their wellness team, along with counselors from the Washburn Center for Children counseling services. They partnered together and they helped then to facilitate our healing circles for us when we hosted those at our school. So it wasn't necessarily part of a curriculum, but we had professionals in the counseling field that helped to facilitate those for us.
Thank you. Lenny Parham has the next question. Lenny asks, are there any school-wide SEL/wellness initiatives during the school day built into the daily academic schedule, such as the morning mile walk for check-ins? If yes, could you please share?
If I could share 2 quick pieces. We're in our 2nd year of utilizing an SEL curriculum called the Positivity Project, P2 for short. And so it's a really robust curriculum that's based off of researched character traits that transcend socioeconomic lines, racial lines, cultural lines, et cetera. And we utilize that as a foundation to spark the conversation. Because I don't care if you're talking about math, I don't care if you're talking about reading, I don't care if you're talking about SEL. There's not a curriculum out there. There's not a book. No disrespect to the authors. There's not a tool out there that's going to do the work for you. You need human beings to execute the work. caring human beings to execute the work. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a great tool to assist you. So we've been using the Positivity Project, and then this is our first year of implementing components of what's called the whole child model, actually out of DC, and utilizing things like what we call morning meeting, and using that opportunity to get started with our scholars during the day. So teachers having conversations with scholars around how their weekend was, how their night was, just trying to make that emotional connection before you start asking them to do reading, writing, and arithmetic. So we have a couple of tools that we use at our school around that.
And our last question is from Vera Lee. Vera writes, that's a powerful idea about having secure adults who are healed adults working with children and youth to create secure environments. Maxwell, where should this development happen in teacher education programs during their first few years of teaching, etc.?
Yes, absolutely. And since we have a lot of higher ed folks on here, I am going to say, of course, it should take place during those educator development programs. The time that we actually launched it, I was sharing with Vera, was in Houston's alternative certification program. And so we were able to kind of get teachers who are going into the classroom prepared for what they may face. And the example I use is you go in your first year teaching, and a kid gets up and says, "Who the F are you? Why are you talking to me?" And then that emotional, whatever childhood traumas you have now come out, and you put your hands on that child, right? So part of that was we wanted to make sure adults going in the building understood their own emotional regulation and had tools to do that. And I will add on a tool to also support those educators as a resource such as Doug Lamoff's How to Teach Like a Champion, right? So now you're not only pairing the social and emotional, but you're also pairing that with like actual educator practices to support those teachers in transitioning to become effective educators from the start. But I do also think it's a tool for everyone, especially for veteran teachers who know their way, but may have also experienced a lot of trauma in the classroom with young people, to also be able to unpack it and find effective ways to communicate and support young people.
And that was the last question for the evening. Thanks everyone for coming this evening. And Bruce and Kim and Elaine, I'll give you the last word for tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Christine. And thanks for the answers to those questions. Obviously, I think everybody who's on this webinar would agree that we could probably go on for about 3 more hours talking to this panel, because there's incredible expertise and knowledge, skill, everything, all kinds of assets available to us tonight. But we want to be respectful of people's bedtimes and dinner times. But we really do want to thank, first of all, everybody who participated tonight, either as a listener, watcher, or as panelists. We really want to thank the panelists for taking the time to join us. We really enjoyed working on our book. We've been happy to see that it's been well received. We think it's addressing a critical issue, not to play off of our own title, but we think it's something that's very much of the moment, and unfortunately or fortunately, something that's going to matter for the foreseeable future. So we hope all of you understand more about integrated student supports after tonight, and will be supporters of that in whatever communities you are, because they're well worth supporting. They're a valuable piece of our education infrastructure, and we need all the support we can get everywhere. So thanks again, and everybody have a great night.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.